Two games ate the entire SNES RPG conversation. You know which ones? Say SNES RPG to anyone and they get to FF6 and Chrono Trigger before you finish the sentence, and then they stop. But here's what I keep thinking about. What about the studios working in the same era on the same hardware, making games that were extraordinary in ways that didn't get talked about? That's what this video is about. 11 that deserved a completely different legacy than the one they got. And some of them never officially came to North America at all. They took one idea and distilled it until it became something quietly profound. The premise is that every enemy you kill frees a trapped soul, and those souls return to the world as people, animals, buildings. The world was emptied, stolen, and you're the instrument of its restoration. Villages rebuild themselves around you as you clear monster lairs. NPCs appear mid-trip back from dungeons. A dog shows up after you free him and waits patiently outside a house that doesn't exist yet. The emotional architecture of it is gentle and then unexpectedly not. You don't feel powerful the way action RPG heroes usually feel powerful. You feel necessary. The combat is simple, move, attack, dodge, but the loop gives it weight. Return from a dungeon and somebody new is standing in a street that was empty an hour ago. Repeat that enough times and it starts doing something to you. I went in expecting a basic Zelda clone and came out the next day still trying to explain to people why it had stayed with me. That doesn't happen often. The gameplay can get repetitive if you need mechanical depth. The dungeons follow a pattern. The concept is deep, the systems aren't. If complex combat is what you need to stay engaged, Soul Blazer won't hold you. What it is a portrait of rebuilding. One of the quietest, most affecting games Quintet made. And they had one more step to take before this trilogy was finished. Every other game on this list operates in some kind of minor key. Robotrek decided to just have fun. You're the kid of an inventor in a town just targeted by a secret society called the Hackers. You don't fight them yourself, your robots do. 3 robot slots, each one built from parts you find and combined through an invention system that actively rewards experimentation. Combine things that have no obvious connection, and sometimes you get something genuinely surprising. The synthesis loop is the game. You're always thinking one step ahead, wondering what combination you haven't tried yet. The tone is genuinely playful in a way the genre almost never commits to. The characters are likable and a little goofy. The villains are ridiculous in an endearing way. The humor lands mid-sentence without announcing itself. Robotrek is just happy to be here, and that turns out to be more charming than I expected. I went in planning to recommend it as a curiosity and nothing more. The robot building loop got me completely. I put in significantly more time than I'd intended. But the story runs thin and the back half loses momentum. Dungeon design in the final stretch repeats itself enough that you'll feel it. This is not a game for narrative depth. As the one game on this list that never once took itself too seriously, earn its place. Brainlord gets mentioned in exactly 0 mainstream SNES RPG discussions, and that has genuinely baffled me for years. Some of these devs later formed Tri-Ace. If you know Star Ocean, if you know Valkyrie Profile, you know what they became. Brainlord is the seed, a 1994 action RPG with Zelda-style dungeon crawling, actual layered environmental puzzles, and a companion system built around small creatures called sprites that fight beside you and level independently. The puzzle design is the real argument. Not push-the-block logic, but layered thinking that asks you to use your sprites and the environment together in ways that feel inventive rather than mechanical. The aesthetic is darker than most other comparable games. More dungeon crawly, more claustrophobic. It doesn't have the warm adventure energy of something like Soul Blazer. It feels like somewhere you're genuinely trying to survive. I found this at a sale with no case and no manual, paid almost nothing, sat down expecting to give it an hour. Finished it 2 days later. It's short though. You can clear it in under 10 hours, and the ending is abrupt in ways that suggest the team ran out of time before the ideas did. The final stretch doesn't land the way it should. Brain Lord earned its spot, and whatever Tri-Ace became, they started from somewhere real. Breath of Fire 2 has a complicated reputation, and I want to push back on part of it. Here's what's fair. The localization is genuinely bad. Not rough around the edges bad. Difficult to follow in places, with character motivations that blur and plot points that should land and just don't. A fan retranslation exists, and it's meaningfully better. If you want the real experience, that's the path in. Here's what isn't fair. Dismissing the game because of it. Because underneath the translation problems, this is doing something ambitious for 1994. The central antagonist is a false religion that has infiltrated every institution in the world. Your party is investigating a conspiracy at the heart of a church the entire population worships, unquestioningly. Dark, structurally unusual storytelling for a JRPG of that era. The shamanism system lets you fuse party members with shaman characters to permanently transform their stats and abilities. You're building your team through combination. You acquire a township and develop it over the course of the game, choosing which residents to bring in. I played this without the fan patch first and pieced the plot together through vibes and inference. Still found something worth caring about. Beyond the localization, the pacing in the mid-game goes wrong. Certain dungeon stretches overstay. The back half needed a trim it didn't get. The ambition is evident. Go in with the fan patch and give it what the official release didn't. Paladin's Quest makes one design decision and bets the entire game on it. There's no mana pool. Every spell costs HP directly, not a separate resource that refills with rest. Your actual health. Deal damage, take damage, use your power, and pay for it with your own body. The loop sounds manageable until you're deep in a dungeon, low on health, knowing you need to cast to survive, but also knowing that casting is what's going to kill you. The tension that creates is something standard MP systems just don't produce. And because healing spells also cost HP to cast, every decision in combat carries real weight. The world wrapped around this mechanic is alien by JRPG standards. No medieval European aesthetic here. Paladin's Quest takes place in a sci-fi fantasy setting that doesn't look like anything else on the system. The palette is unusual. The atmosphere has a quality of isolation that I've never seen quite replicated. It feels slightly wrong in a way that makes it stick. I needed multiple attempts with this one. It demands patience and punishes impatience in ways that felt almost personal. The narrative, however, doesn't match the atmosphere the setting implies. The world feels richer than the story told inside it. If you come for plot depth, you'll be disappointed. The systems are the appeal, full stop. Strange, mechanical, overlooked. Exactly the kind of game this list exists to surface. Which one of these did you own and never actually finish? Drop it below. And if this content is your thing, subscribing genuinely keeps the channel going. This game opens by showing you the ending. Not a vague teaser. A full playable prologue where you control the great hero Maxim in his final battle against the four Sinistrals, his last moments with the people he loves, the conclusion of a story you haven't been told yet. Then it cuts. Younger Maxim. The beginning. A completely normal-looking JRPG setup. You know where it ends. The game knows you know. It spends the next 30 hours using that knowledge as a structural tool. What Lufia 2 does genuinely exceptionally are the dungeons. Puzzle-heavy, inventive, designed to introduce a mechanic, push you to master it, and twist it right when you think you've figured it out. And then there's the Ancient Cave, 99 floors of procedurally generated dungeon, starting from scratch each time. Every item and piece of equipment randomized per run. In 1996, the roguelike loop before anyone had a word for it. The capsule monsters, companion creatures that grow and evolve as you feed them items. Add an attachment layer the game doesn't need, but absolutely earns. The random encounter rate, however, is bad, even by SNES era standards. You will be fighting constantly in places you'd rather not be. That friction was normalized at the time, and it hits harder coming back to it now. But that opening sequence is one of the most confident narrative moves on this system. And this game almost never comes up in the conversation it belongs in. There's a game that looked at the genre conventions of the time, decided they were constraints, and made something that has never quite been replicated since. ActRaiser puts two completely different games inside one cartridge. Not as separate modes that don't talk to each other, but as two halves of one experience that need each other to work. You play as the Master, a deity awakening after defeat to find a world given over to demons. The core loop alternates. In action stages, you descend into a physical body and fight through side-scrolling ruins, ending with a boss that feels cinematic for its year. Then you rise back to your floating realm, guide a small angel companion across an overhead map, and help a settlement of humans clear land, build towns, and send prayers up to you. The city sim isn't decoration. Completing the action stages opens new land below. Your people's offerings restore your strength for the next ascent. Both halves genuinely need each other. What holds up unreasonably well is the soundtrack. The opening theme was the kind of thing that made people turn their TV up to make sure they were hearing it right. It didn't sound like a game. It still doesn't. But the action stages were pretty weak. They're competent, but not exceptional. And ActRaiser 2 dropped the sim sections entirely based on some mixed feedback, which was absolutely the wrong read. The sequel is worse for it. Illusion of Gaia is them using their voice to say something that actually stings. You're a boy with a flute, a connection to something ancient he doesn't understand, and a journey that takes him through real-world historical locations. The Egyptian pyramids, the Incan ruins, the Nazca lines, a lost civilization called Mu. Quintet uses those settings not as aesthetic backdrop, but as actual weight. This world has history, things that happened before you arrived, civilizations that rose and collapsed for reasons. Will can transform into two warrior forms with different abilities, and those transformations are tied to what he's learning about himself. What separates this from Soul Blazer is atmosphere. There's a melancholy running through Illusion of Gaia that you feel before you can name it. And at a specific point in the story, I won't say when, it earns that melancholy completely. You'll know when you get there. The progression respects your time. No random encounters in cleared rooms, and instead of grinding levels, defeating enemy groups permanently raises your stats. The upgrades feel earned rather than accumulated, but it's linear in ways that can feel constraining. The world is vast, but your path through it is narrow. If freedom and exploration are what you need from an RPG, this isn't built for that. What it's built for is atmosphere and emotional precision. Both it delivers completely. Most games ask you to lead an army. Ogre Battle asks you to lead it responsibly, and then keep score the whole time. This is a real-time tactical RPG at a scale the SNES had no business running. Multiple squads moving simultaneously across large maps. Engaging in auto combat you set up through positioning and formation, while the clock keeps moving and you can't pause to breathe. The depth is significant enough that explaining it fully takes longer than most games take to teach their own tutorials. Ogre Battle does not explain itself. It trusts you to want to figure it out. What it does do is track everything. Your reputation, your alignment, whether you liberate towns quickly or leave them under occupation. Whether you use dark units, execute captured leaders, or build balanced formations of the right classes. The tarot cards drawn at the start shape your army's character across the campaign. Multiple endings branch from how you actually behaved, not from what you chose in dialogue, from how you played. I didn't understand alignment for the first 6 hours, and my reputation quietly collapsed as a result. Had to restart. I was annoyed, then impressed, then completely unable to stop. But the learning curve is steep enough to feel punishing. The interface isn't friendly. If you bounce off in the first 2 hours, come back with a guide that specifically explains the alignment system. After that initial climb, it earns every hour. Seven Saga has a reputation, and the reputation is accurate. This game is difficult, but there's more to it than that. The setup is genuinely interesting. 7 apprentice warriors, each with completely different stats, abilities, and species, are competing to collect 7 ancient runes for the king. You pick one and set out. The other 6 are alive in the world, recruiting each other as partners, showing up on your map, sometimes coming directly for your runes. It creates a paranoid, competitive atmosphere unlike anything else on the system. Then you hit the mid-game, and the difficulty goes vertical. Here's something most people don't know. Enix deliberately increased enemy stat growth for the North American release. Not slightly. Enough to make 7th Saga measurably harder in the West than in Japan. Players who bought it expecting a normal JRPG found their parties wiped by random encounters in areas they'd just reached. The difficulty felt wrong because it had been changed, calibrated differently, and shipped without explanation. I picked Lux the robot on my first run because she looked the least interesting. She has a defensive build I did not understand. I struggled badly through the first third of the game before switching to Camille for a second run, which felt like a completely different experience. The late game pushes past challenging into genuinely unfair in ways that won't feel rewarding to everyone. This is a game that demands you meet it on its own terms. As a concept, as a competitive, paranoid structure, it deserved better than being dismissed as broken. Terranigma is the 3rd entry in the unofficial trilogy that began with Soul Blazer and continued through Illusion of Gaia, and it is by any reasonable measure the most ambitious thing they ever made. Enix published it in Japan in 1995, published it in Europe and Australia in 1996, and never, not once, not ever, officially released it in North America. If you grew up in the US and didn't have an import copy or the determination to track it down by other means, Terranigma simply didn't exist for you. A game this complete, this emotionally precise, this devastating, and it just wasn't there. You play as Ark, a boy who wakes to find himself chosen as the instrument of the world's resurrection. Not metaphorically. You travel to a demon realm, defeat the corruption of each continent, and bring it back to life. Plants first, then animals, then people, then civilization itself. You watch the world rebuild because you made it possible. The same restoration loop Soul Blazer used, scaled to the entire planet. And then, chapter by chapter, you learn what that means. What Ark actually is. What the act of creation costs someone who was never asked if they wanted to pay it. The combat is tight and physically expressive in ways that feel genuinely modern. The soundtrack is extraordinary, even measured against the best of the SNES library. The final hours hit me in a way I wasn't prepared for the first time and still wasn't quite prepared for on the second. But the thing is, you need the European cartridge or a fan patch to play this in English. It requires deliberate effort. It is worth every part of that effort. One game from this list, if you only play one, make it Terranigma, and then try to explain to me why it never came to North America. The SNES RPG library is bigger and stranger and more ambitious than the games that defined its reputation suggest. The devs that tried something different, that took real risks, that shipped without a safety net and mostly disappeared into the margins. They made things worth remembering. Which of these did you play when nobody around you had ever heard of it? Drop in the comments. I genuinely read every one. And if this kind of excavation is what you come here for, subscribing helps me keep making it instead of moving on to safer topics. It means more than a number on a screen.